Hiring your first independent contractor or employee in a business is a really great thing. It means your business is growing. That being said, a lot of corporations will shy away from hiring their first employee because they have to pay payroll deductions to their employee, and obviously because they will have to pay more taxes. A lot of them will then opt to get an independent contractor instead of an employee. What ends up happening is that the independent contractor will be incorporated, and the corporation will hire the independent contractor, and the independent contractor will invoice them for their services. Then the corporation will pay them for those services. What ends up happening here is that the corporation does not have to pay payroll deductions for that independent contractor, and vice versa. The independent contractor gets to reap the tax benefits of being an independent contractor as opposed to an employee. There's evidently a lot of fiscal benefits here. Corporations believe that just having this structure, hiring a corporation to do the service and that corporation invoicing them, is sufficient to prove that relationship, and it absolutely is not. If ever there is an issue with the independent contractor that you've hired, the courts are not only going to look at those criteria. They have a whole entire list of criteria that they look at to determine if it really is an independent contractor business relationship versus an employer-employee relationship. We're going to run through all that criteria today. The first criteria that the courts will look at is subordination. This is by far the most important criteria. Here, the courts are going to ask some of the following questions. Does the business have the right to hire or fire? Does the business have control over the independent contractor's schedule? Does the business have control over when this person is working, where they are working? Does it have control over how they conduct their work? If you are answering yes to the majority of these questions, then you're most likely looking at an employer-employee relationship. If you answer no, you're most likely looking at an independent contractor-business relationship. Here's what the difference is. An independent contractor has control over his schedule. He has control over when he can conduct his work. He has control over the manner that he is conducting his work. There's a lot less subordination than you would normally have if you had an employer-employee relationship. The second criteria that the courts will look at is financial liability. Who is financially liable if there is a loss, and who reaps the benefits? Here, the courts are going to be asking a set of questions. Who covers the maintenance costs of the independent contractor? Who covers the operating costs of the independent contractor? Who pays the expenses of the independent contractor? For example, if the independent contractor is flying somewhere, who's paying those expenses? If something happens to the tools of the independent contractor, for example, if his computer breaks down, who replaces that equipment? Who pays for that loss? If when you answer these questions, the answer is always that the employer or corporation is paying for that loss, then you're most likely looking at an employer-employee relationship. But if your answers to these questions are mostly that the independent contractor is the one who is responsible to pay for that loss, then you're most likely looking at an independent contractor business relationship. The third criteria that the courts will look at is the ownership of the tools. Who owns the tools that the contractor is using? For tools, you can think of various things depending on the work that they're doing. But mainly, we're usually talking about a laptop or a computer, and maybe alongside that, there's a lot of specialized equipment that the contractor is using. If the contractor owns those tools and brings them to conduct his work, then you're mostly looking at an independent contractor business relationship. If he is responsible for the loss of those tools, so for example, if those tools break down or if he has to replace them, again, you're looking at an independent contractor business relationship. If, on the other hand, the business is the one that supplies the work tools and the business is the one that pays for them if something happens to them, then you're looking at an employer-employee relationship. The fourth criteria that we're always looking at is the degree to which the activities of the independent contractor are integral to the business. Here, you need to really assess what the contractor is doing and who he is doing that work for. For example, let's take a consultant. If the consultant is doing work for that business and the activities that he's doing for that business are really pivotal and vital to the existence of that business, then you're mostly looking at an employer-employee relationship. On the other hand, if that independent contractor is hired for a one-time project, then you're mostly looking at an independent contractor business relationship. If you have an employer-employee relationship, you're really talking about a situation where that contractor or that person is only working for one business. Usually they're exclusive to only one business. Now, if you're dealing with an independent contractor, a true independent contractor will have multiple clients, and they are not exclusively working for only one person. That's what differentiates both parties from one another. The other thing here is that when we're talking about an employer-employee, we're talking about someone who's working for an indefinite period of time. They're not working only for a couple months. They're really working on a long-term basis. When you're dealing with an independent contractor, you're really talking about someone who's working on a project-based basis. So they're working maybe on one project for 2-3 months, and then the project ends and the relationship ends. That's really the difference between the two parties. The last thing the courts will always look at is the agreement between the parties. I always urge my clients to sign proper agreements, especially if you're an independent contractor. It's so important that you sign one. The thing that you still want to keep in mind, though, is that even if you sign that agreement and the agreement is titled Independent Contractor Agreement, the courts are still going to look at all this criteria to determine if you really are being treated as an independent contractor. With that being said, inside that agreement, you really want to make sure that it's clear that it is an independent contractor relationship. The agreement will state that this person is an independent contractor. There's no employer-employee relationship that's being formed. There's no fiduciary relationship that's being formed. It'll be super clear on this criteria. Inside that contract, you'll also find sections talking about how the contractor is going to be invoicing the business, how they will be paying their expenses, when they will be getting paid, what type of work they will be doing, how long that work will be conducted for. And typically speaking, both parties will be able to terminate the contract whenever they want. The contract will usually state that the independent contractor is not exclusive to this business, that they're allowed to have multiple clients. The courts will always look at this contract as a final state, establish if it really is an independent contractor business relationship or an employer-employee relationship. That's it for the criteria that the courts look at. Like I said, these criteria are not exhaustive, but this is really the main things that the courts will be looking at. The courts really need to be able to see that we're really talking about someone who is completely independent for the business and they're being hired on a short-term basis to do a one-time project or 2 projects, and then the contract or relationship ends. That's it for our segment today. I hope it was useful. I hope you liked it. If ever you want us to help you draft your next independent contractor agreement or revise an agreement that maybe you're signing, please don't hesitate to contact us. It would be our absolute pleasure to help you. You can find all the contact information below. And don't forget to subscribe. We upload new videos every Monday.